Melbourne's Fashion Week begins today and it coincides with a new report calling on the industry to reduce its waste. Researchers have spent 4 years studying Australia's fashion sector and they've outlined a course of action for them to lower their footprint. For more on this, I'm joined now by the report's co-author Julie Boulton from the Monash Sustainable Development Institute. Thanks for joining us, Julie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So how much waste are we talking about and how big is Australia's fashion footprint?
So it's big. Our fashion footprint is really big, but what we want to start by talking about is that the report itself is not actually just about waste. We tend to focus a lot on the end, and what we see is, the voluminous levels and amounts of landfill that we can see with old clothing tossed out the front of charity bins, for example. And actually we need to start from the beginning. And so we've spent a long time actually looking at the entire life cycle of clothing. So we want to start from how clothing is designed and produced in the first place. Look at how that clothing is made, look at how that clothing is sold, how that clothing is used, and then eventually what happens to that clothing when it's disposed of. You actually have to start from the beginning and consider the whole life cycle, and that's what makes fashion and textiles a particularly tricky product to look at.
So can you give us an example, Julie? Let's just take the trusty T-shirt, for instance. What kind of life cycle are we seeing? I know that you want to move from a more linear model to a circular one.
Correct. So what you want to do is start by looking at what goes into making of that T-shirt. So what are the resources that have been used? How much resources? So you look at the amount of water that's been used, the carbon emissions that have gone into it. Then you need to think of how that item has been transferred from, say if it's made from cotton, well, how does it get from the cotton farm? You pick the cotton, you take that cotton over to the mill, it gets processed and then probably gets shipped or transported to a third country where it then gets turned into the fabric. It can be transported again to be made into the T-shirt, then gets transported again via a ship, a truck, a train, in order to go and packaged up in order to go into the shop, where then the user comes in, purchases it. Then if we only use it once or twice and go, well, okay, we've had enough of that T-shirt and throw it out, that's a complete waste of resources. And we know that we're using up our natural resources at an unsustainable rate. So something has to shift. And so we want to start to think about, can we produce and can we consume in a much more sustainable way? And we think the fashion industry can totally do it. There's some awesome examples already of how the fashion industry is really being the creative, wonderful, imaginative industry that we expect it to be. And so this report is really just encouraging and showcasing these great examples and saying, hey, there's a path here for everybody, let's take this path forward.
So what are some examples where the fashion industry is getting it right, and what needs to change? How can we transition out of the waste phase?
So there's a lot of steps to transition, and what's key here is that there's a lot of players that need to come to the party. It's not just up to one particular sector or one particular player to change. There's only so much that one part of the chain can enact. So we need to look again at the entire chain and go, right, well, are we making sure that we're clear on what is a sustainable and responsible product from the first place? Are we actually saying, this is what the best case is, this is what the best case material is, and this is what we expect our clothing to be made out of? Are there guidelines in place so people are aware? Can they trace the good? Is there transparency involved so they're aware of what's gone into it? And then are there guidelines around the use and how we take care of the product? Then can we repair it? Can we make sure that we extend its life cycle? So there's a number of steps that have to be taken along the way, and this report outlines a number of different pathways. The key one being that we need to really sit back and think about what is a sustainable and responsible industry going forward, and what are the roles that everyone around the table needs to play.
So one of those people at the table, the consumers, what can we do to make a difference?
Yeah, we can think really carefully about what it is we're purchasing. So our first step is, do we need it? Is there something else in our cupboard that can meet the requirements? Can we borrow? Can we repair what we already have? So those kind of considerations, to be a conscious citizen and to really think carefully about what it is we're purchasing and why. Researching who it is you're buying from. So taking the time to actually think and investigate the product, who's made the product, How far has it had to travel in order to get to where it's ended up? And then how long are you going to use it for? So buying something that you know that you're going to use for a really, really long time, and you're going to love it for a really long time, and then potentially you can pass it on. That's really, really critical. So, you know, one of our pathways is about that education aspect, and it's about educating yourself and just taking the time to think a little bit more carefully about what's gone into the product and how you're going to use it and what you're going to do with it once you're finished with it.
I don't think you can see me, Julie, but I'm wearing a jacket, and I picked my jacket up from a second-hand shop from Lifeline, and I get most of my clothes from there. So recycling is a really good way forward, because if you get tired of it, then you can just pick something else up. Thank you so much. Julie Boulton there from the Monash Sustainable Development Institute. Thank you for your time.
Thanks.